Hey guys, welcome back to another video right here in the Creative Color mini series on Freewheel Photos. What we're going to be looking at today is how to use color balance, black and white, and photo filter to get this effect. So this is the after version and this is the before version. So stay tuned and let's go. All right, so here we are with the image. I turned off all the filters, and as you can see, I have 4 filters built up on this image. Where we're going to start is with the black and white filter, which is down here at the very bottom. This is where the base of the image really starts. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on, and let's take a look at what I did inside of the black and white filter to really drive this look. First thing you're going to notice is the opacity is not 100%. Now you can mess around with this to get the look that you really want for this desaturated look, but the black and white filter, it adds in some of those gray tones, so it really helps to sell the black and white filter. You know, you can pull it all the way down if you want and really have like no real effect, and you know, maybe that's the end of it. This is the reason why I've included the black and white filter in the Creative Color series, because this really does manipulate your color. But we're going to move this back up to about 58, because with all of the other items that I'm going to add in, this is really going to come to life. Now let's take a look at what I did here. Now the color response, this is going to be different for every image, but I did lower the brightness on the reds, the greens, the aquas, and the magentas, and then there's a little bit of a boost. This is really the auto, but that's essentially what's happening, right? And then the next thing that I did, and I think this is where it really comes to life, and I wish there was a way that I can turn this off and turn it on, but inside of the tone module, you can see I brought the brightness down, increased the contrast, increased the highlights, increase the shadows, increase the whites, and I brought the blacks down. All right, that alone is what really helped to drive this image, or this look, I should say. This is a very stylized look. Now let's take a look at the color balance. Now this is a new filter, or not a new filter, but new to the series, and I'm not going to cover it in great detail because it works a lot like the split tone filter, with the exception that you have midtones. The difference here is you can't click inside of this color module and change your color the way that you would like it to. You actually got to use this slider. So I'm not a huge fan of that, but I needed this because I wanted to add some color into the midtones, the shadows, and the highlights independent of one another for this look. So if I turn this off, you can see that the image is still pretty gray. If I turn this on, it turns more of a blue look. Now this is where a lot of your color and your tone, think of this as like the toner module inside of the black and white filter, except for you're doing it separate or independent from the black and white filter. I prefer to work this way because if I want to mask out like these back little areas and only keep the effect right here when it comes to the color pop, I could do that. Now I'm not going to do that for this image because I actually think that it looks good with a little bit of a blue tint in the highlights, and then with the color, with the midtones, I want it more of a green look with still keeping the blue hue or tint, I should say. I wanted it to be a little closer to the greens, and the only way that you can really manipulate this is to pull this left and right. As you see, I'm pulling it left, and now the image is starting to get warm as I enter into the more warm colors, the oranges, yellows, and reds, as you can see there. And then it'll start to cool down as I move into the more blue like colors, which I'm not a huge fan of this slider system. Hopefully ON1 gives us access to the color wheel and the sliders in future releases. But the other two options here, amount and brightness, I think you guys will be okay with. The next thing is going to be shadows. Now, the shadows, I really wanted to warm these up, and you can really see it down here in the bottom of the image. And that's just so the image itself, because there's not very much shadow, that's to help contrast with the cooler tones that I added into the highlights and the midtones. That's the only reason why I chose orange. You can choose whatever color you want. You can choose literally any color that you think would work, but I personally like the warm tone, which is why I chose that. And then, you know, the amount and the brightness, it's shadows, so I want it to still be dark and you know, kind of more of a you feel this and less of a you can really tell, with the exception of down here, which this doesn't really bother me all that much. Now, the antique filter, I added this here originally because I wanted to add a little bit more of a faded look and, you know, get like an airy feel. Now, obviously, it was way too strong, so turning it on and pulling down the opacity is probably going to be more in line with what you would want to do on an image like this. But, you know, depending on the image that you are editing, this may not be a bad idea. Turning it off, turning it on, you can see it just brightens it up a little bit. I'm not going to go too deep into that because I've already covered the antique filter. Now, the photo filter, this is also a new filter in the series for Creative Color. I decided to throw this on because look at the pop that you get when you add this in. Now, I'm not using any blend modes. This is just the normal blend mode. And the filter type that I have here is solid, and I have moved this to a blue. Now, with this one, you can actually click on it and you can move around and select the color that you want. You can also use the hue slider, but I don't see why anyone would really want to use that. You can. I'm not a fan of it. I'd rather just click around in the circle or the color wheel. Now, the way that the photo filter works is it's supposed to emulate or imitate, I guess is the better way of saying it, putting a filter in front of your lens. This is very, very popular in landscape. I know that in some, you know, creative portraits, people may put filters over their lens, but you get a few different types here. I'm using the solid, so this would imitate putting a solid piece of blue lens or a solid piece of a blue filter over the lens. Now, you can do graduated, and with graduated, you get a few different options here of either the top half, which is what it's on. You can drop it down, put it on the bottom half, all that. You know, that is pretty self-explanatory, and you get some options here for the distance, rotation, and transition. Transition is how big is the fade. If I pull this all the way up, you can see the fade starts to happen a lot lower down here. And if I pull it all the way up, you can see it starts more in that area. So it's one of those things you would have to play around with to figure out how you want this to work out. You can even do a bicolor where you get two colors for a filter. That could be a very creative way of adding in you know, something that's different. And then of course you get center, and that's just gonna protect the middle of your image. There's no filter in the center of my image. And let me make it a little bit larger. And you can choose if you want it to be on the edges or if you want it just in the middle of your image. So if you just want like a color spotlight, maybe this is a great filter, but I prefer it to be on solid for this particular effect. Now, With that, with all of these, you get an option. Let me make sure it's all of these. Yeah. With all of these, you get an option of the saturation, which I desaturated this a little bit because it's a desaturated look. So I don't want like a very punchy blue, but at the same time, I threw in the polarizer. Now, you can play around with this, but what the polarizer does is it really adds in like this separation and a contrast is the better way of saying it. Adds in some contrast to your image. Without the photo filter, I think that this look is good. But with the photo filter, it really marries in those blues that I put into the color balance and brings it all together. So, what do I recommend you do with this particular filter? Well, based on the color that you add into your color balance in your highlights and your midtones, right? The way that you get this look is there has to be a little bit of harmonious colors between your highlights and your midtones. Whatever color you choose, probably for your highlights, is a good place to start. So if you choose blue for your highlights, then you should choose a blue for your color filter. Now, you can make that blue however you want, right? And saturate it or desaturate it. Now, one of the things that I didn't cover, and I'm sorry, is mode. Now, I use strong, and that's just going to give me, obviously, a strong look. You can go with subtle, and subtle works pretty well. You can clean up the highlights, so now it's not going to add it into the highlights, or you can have clean shadows. And clean shadows works really well when you have a dark image. So based off of what type of image you have, a dark image or a bright image, you may want to mess around with this, but I find that I prefer strong on this particular image. Now, what I was saying earlier about the color on your image, if this is your whatever your highlights are, this is what I would recommend you put as the color here, somewhere in that range. It doesn't have to be the exact color, but somewhere in that range, because this is what's going to give that final aesthetic to make everything pop. Without it, you can get away and, you know, you have some, this is a really good look. But when you turn on the photo filter, it just brings out everything and makes this image really stand out. So hopefully that made sense. If it did, go ahead and smash the like button. If you're new here, consider subscribing. My name is Chris. I create content centered around ON1 Photo Raw. And until next time, I want you guys to stay inspired and keep creating. Peace.